let's bring out Ontario's FTC lead inspector, Michael Nucci, to talk about robot inspections.
Hey, Karthik, thanks for the introduction. So, as he said, I'm going to be talking about inspections. So, obviously, the forefront question on everyone's mind right now is, what do remote inspections look like? So, inspections look a bit different this year, as you may expect. You have to inspect your robot yourself, since we can't feasibly send an inspector to each of your build spaces. Not to worry, inspecting really isn't that hard. I'm going to give you a couple tips here and access to a couple resources that should get you through the process. Importantly, your robot needs to be inspected to compete at an event. Specifically, before participating in any matches, you have to pass inspection. If you change your robot, you have to re-inspect your robot, same as every other year. So I'm just going to give you a baseline knowledge, not too deep a dive into the rules due to lack of time, but I'll cover a couple rules that need a bit of clarification based off of what you would see on the checklist. All right, next slide. So what to expect when you're inspecting. So all inspections are just to ensure your robot can safely and fairly compete. So doesn't harm anyone, harm other robots, and doesn't have any unfair advantages over other teams' robots. With an inspection, you have types I'm going to be covering here, robot and field. So robot inspections make sure you're built within the robot rules, whereas field inspections ensure your robot operates properly on the field and doesn't do weird things. All of these are completely based on the robot rules found in Game Manual Part 1, I believe, Section 7 and 8. So nothing is new here. It is all documented right there. Any team member can inspect the robot, doesn't have to be a lead mentor. Anyone can do it. And these are completed using inspection checklists. Next slide. The checklist, perfect. So the checklist, it is by far the most useful tool you have when you're inspecting. It is essentially just a condensed version of the robot rules, so that way it's easy to go through and check each one to make sure you're compliant. It's found in many places. At the end of Game Manual Part 1 is where you can find, I believe, both of them in Appendix B and C respectively, or under Game and Season Info, they have a separate one where you can download. And this checklist is divided into sections based on content for both of them. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what the checklist looks like on this slide. So you can see the two major topics there, robot size inspection and general robot rules, where they have a blurb of what you need to be compliant to the rule, as well as the rule it references. So if the little blurb isn't enough and you don't understand exactly what you need to be looking for, you reference the rule number shown on the right-hand most side, and you can get some clarification there. And this is a checklist, so you check the boxes as you go through inspecting each of these. You go through generally top to bottom, but you can skip over something, come back to it later if you don't meet the requirements yet, but you want to go check into it later. All right, next slide. So I'm going to go over a couple of the major rules in there that may cause confusion, have caused confusion in the past, so that way you guys are better prepared to inspect. Most notably, robot size. So this takes a bit more additional tools than the rest of the inspection process, where you can essentially know the rules and go through the checklist. Robot size, you actually need an additional tool to complete this. So what the ruling means for this is any position your robot starts in at the beginning of a match has to be within an 18 by 18 by 18 inch volume. You can have multiple configurations of the same volume, but you have to inspect them all to make sure they're within that volume to start. Let me repeat that again just to make it abundantly clear. When your robot starts the match, you have to be within that volume. You can expand as much as you want after you start the match, but you have to start in that volume. There's another subheading on the checklist, which essentially just states, if your robot has a part that moves as soon as you hit the power button without any controller input, it needs to have a warning label on it. That way it doesn't just activate and accidentally hit someone and injure them. So how to check the robot size? There's no real official standard for how to do it. There's many suggestions out there and one tool that's mainly used, but here's a couple methods you could go for. So first of all, you get a cardboard box with the volume. I believe a number of home improvement stores have moving boxes about the 18 by 18 by 18 inch size, and you can modify them to fit. Or if you haven't had a cardboard lying around because you've been ordering a lot online and you're feeling adventurous, you can make a box yourself. There's the robot sizing tool, which is what's mainly used, but not officially standard. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, it's essentially just a U shape that you run over your robot in first front to back, then perpendicular side to side. So that way you check that it's 18 inches by 18 inches all around. There's a little video on the next slide when we get to it that should make that a bit more clear. Oh, go back slide. Sorry, Dave. Last one is a tape bounding box. So if you make a box 18 inches square on the ground and put your robot inside it and make sure nothing sticks out from that box, that your exterior dimensions are within the 18 inches, and then check the height with a tape measure. That works as well. It's a bit less elegant than the robot sizing tool, but it gets the job done. Feel free to get creative. As Kyle mentioned, there's a Slack group. So if you have a creative idea and you want to show it off, I'd love to see it. Post it in there. All right, now to the next slide. So robot side. So first one is an example of the cardboard box. Apologies for the videos. It was originally made in PowerPoint and don't transfer to Google Slides very well. Next one is the robot sizing tool. So as you can see, you run the sizing tool front to back, then side to side. So that way you check the height with the 18 inches and the width. You can make the sizing tool out of wood, polycarbonate, or I've heard stacked pieces of cardboard work surprisingly well for that. So you have a couple layers of cardboard cut out to that shape, stacked together and glued. Yeah, we can run it again. And then last one is an example of the bounding box on the ground, which takes a second to show up usually once you hit the animate. Anyway, I can keep talking for a minute. And then check the height. Usually a straight edge works well for that. So a ruler or a clipboard are both very good options. Next slide. So for general robot rules, the first two are very similar on that for clarification. Just make sure you don't have anything hanging outside your robot that gets caught on the field, because other robots aren't so much of an issue this year. You don't want to destroy your field mid-match. That's not a great idea for you. Team numbered alliance markers, you still do need them this year. I don't know if there's assigned alliances, but checklist still has them, so make sure you have them around at least. Energy used by the robot, that wasn't clarified very well in the checklist. That's just if you have springs, a battery, or use gravity to move your robot around, that's fine. Anything else is no good. Next slide. Electrical parts. Make sure your main power switch is installed properly and visible. That way, if your robot starts going off the rails and doing stuff you don't want it to do, it's easy to turn it off. Also, so your switch doesn't fall out and turn off your robot in the middle of a match. Similarly with the battery, you want to keep those secure because flying batteries rarely end well for anyone. Make sure everything's wired properly. This is just to show you where the wiring guide is if you're having issues. That link there. Thank you, Karthik. Robot controller, new this year, you can use a control hub, and there's motor restrictions. Next slide. Field inspection. So primary goal of field inspection is to make sure your robot operates properly on the field. It's just software versioning, naming all your hardware right, and then making sure you're using the right control components. So the field inspector's manual has a very comprehensive guide, has to go over each of these steps, since I can't go over all the phone steps on your driver station. The best explanation around is there. You'll be hearing more about that volunteer resources page in later presentations, because it is very useful since you're essentially doing the volunteering. Next slide. So, quick summary, since I'm about at time here. When you're going to inspect, make sure you understand Game Manual Part 1. Before you inspect, reread it, understand the rules well. Next two things are your checklists. Make sure you have them. I recommend printing them out and putting them on a clipboard. Makes you feel very official. It's a great time. But if you use a tablet or have them on a computer, that is perfectly fine too. Just make sure you have them and are using them. Your preferred method of checking robot size. Thank you, Kate, for putting the link there. Make sure your robot is in the state it will be competing in before you start your inspection, as that is what you need to make sure is legal. Make your driver station there, since you need to check versioning. Clipboard I mentioned with the checklists, optional, but I very much am a fan of the clipboard. Safety glasses, since anytime you're operating your robot, you should wear safety glasses. And since you have to operate it for field inspection and robot inspection, have them on hand and be wearing them. As well, you need to be able to update your software for the field inspection. Rev Hardware Client is a good resource for that if you want to update a lot of things at once. And onto the resources. So, as we mentioned before, there's a Slack group. There's a channel for FTC inspection. I'm on it. If you ask a question, I will answer. There's a drivers meeting every Thursday before the remote events. There's going to be some time to ask questions. As well, I believe Dave has already sent out a submission portal for inspection review. So you submit a few things. I'll have a look at it and give you a review of an inspection, essentially. Give you some help guiding you through it. As well, Game Manual Part 1, that should sort of be your first stop if you're confused about a rule on the checklist. Go there, look into it, and then you need further clarification, reach out. happy to answer questions. As well, legal and illegal parts list. That is also at the volunteer resources, I believe, at the link there. And that'll show pictures of legal and illegal parts if you're having concerns over whether a part you have is legal or not. And that's it from me.
All right, thank you, Michael. Very detailed, very informative. We do have a couple questions. So one is, do you need to submit a photo/video of the robot within the 18-inch limit?
You do not have to submit. If you're using the submission portal, we do ask that you have a couple pictures indicating sort of the length, width, and height of your robot. So try and have it in your configuration for that. But officially, you do not have to. But if you're using that resource, I would like to have it so that way I can let you know, essentially. Or you'll probably know before me at that point and rectify it yourselves. But
good point there. And then another question, did you mention the maximum height and length of a launched ring?
No, that wouldn't be under robot rules. I think that's game rules. Yeah. The maximum height is just in reference to the starting configuration, if I mentioned, for what I mentioned during this presentation.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. That was really informative. Again, this is one of those things that's really new for teams, being their own inspector. But so I hope they've learned a lot. And then I hope when we get back to having physical events, they can volunteer as inspectors too. So that's
certainly would love to have.